Alright, the band that has directly contributed to conversations I have with people about what I hate about music and popular music, delivered directly to me via commission. Oh god, oh fuck! Welcome to Everyone Does Music, where today we're doing a unique review and a commission review, all courtesy of my coworker and friend Nate. Hey Nate. Today's video is centered around the One compilation by the Beatles. This is unique because, for starters, it's the first full compilation album I've done, meaning it's going to be a little more difficult to rate it up against a soundtrack, full album, or even EP, as it's just a greatest hits sort of thing. So while this may be a well put together compilation with popularity in the band's personal polish in mind, I mean, as you know, it's a 2000 compilation of Beatles music. I think by then they're like, oh yeah, this one's good, this one's good. It's a specifically cherry-picked collection, meaning this is more of an evaluation with a review score attached as opposed to a review. But I like naming things in a very simple way, so it's going to be called a review down there. More often than not, greatest hits collections and compilations are inherently critically good due to their nature, so keep that in mind as I get into all of this. The driving idea behind the Beatles in a modern context is the publicly accepted opinion that this is one of the most influential and important bands in music history. As much as I have personal disdain for them, I'm not going to deny that, but I do want to establish throughout this review video the importance of knowing how an album stacks up against its contemporaries at the time versus the grand scope and overall passage of time. While it is true that not just the United Kingdom born elements, but the sound itself on a grand scale does have unique elements for its time, and again went on to influence things later on within rock music, pop rock, etc., as more music genres became inherent and music evolved. Basically, a lot of it can be attributed to influence from around the world and the world around the Beatles. In their sense, there's a sameness when delving into acts around the same time and age. There's a lot of obvious Bob Dylan and Beach Boys vibes evident on much of their mid-60s work, but you could also say the same thing looking at Beach Boys albums, that there's a lot of Bob Dylan and the Beatles influence. Or maybe there's no influence because this was the 50s and 60s of a general term rock music, and they're still trying to figure out what they're doing with their hands. I will say that vocally there is a good amount of individuality to be found, and I was kind of surprised by that, actually sitting down and listening to them critically, as opposed to, of course, hearing their songs passively and casually. Both John Lennon and Paul McCartney contribute vocals to the work for the most part. I think there's a couple things here and there where the other members pop in for gang vocals, or perhaps a single line. But vocals aside, I love the running joke for anyone even mildly aware of the band to shit on Ringo Starr for being a mid at best drummer, supposedly not even the best drummer in the Beatles. But truly in their early work, he's very mid at best. Like the first 5 tracks on this album being the One compilation's album run, his contributions could have easily been done by essentially anyone. If it wasn't for the fact that every member of the band had at least one instrument, being that Paul and John had a stringed instrument in their hands, they could tap along a little drum beat and keep it going themselves. And this could be just a part of the early 50s and 60s rock formula. I'm not an expert on things to that extent. I'm just doing my best to review this. Despite his name popping up in many conversations, Starr is no Smith, to put it lightly. On the flip side of that, there is much note to be made about songs such as A Hard Day's Night and I Feel Fine, with both Lennon and George Harrison giving some enjoyable work on those songs, among, of course, others. Oddly enough, perhaps a common theme in music from the middle of the century, there was more individuality and unique elements in the initial releases from the Beatles and what followed soon after. The first song, and of course larger piece of music that represents this, being 8 Days a Week, which outside of a nice vocally drawn out chorus offers little for differing elements. I used to think that the further back in music you go, the harder it'd be to use differences in music as part of the critical process, but after now having gone into many different catalogs, especially rock, especially Beatles adjacent artists, it's evident that you can still use this as a proper criticism despite the inherent age. Expanding out of the Beatles songs strictly in this compilation, even the album that 8 Days a Week is taken from, Beatles for Sale, is lacking in many ways, even when put up against music strictly from that era, and that year even, or the year before or after. This subsides with a couple tracks, with some personally favorable tracks like Help, but then comes back for a 3-song stretch with We Can Work It Out, Paperback Writer, and a song that I will never fail to call critically obnoxious and lacking, Yellow Submarine. I don't care if it's a for fun, whimsical song. Yellow Submarine is dog shit. Yes, I know the intention and nearly direct quoting grace behind the song was to make a fun, whimsical, children's song-esque track, but that doesn't excuse the fact that it's here on a compilation of greatest hits. And it's only here because it's catchy. It's a greatest hit because it's catchy. And regarded as one of their best tracks, seemingly based on, if you ask me, pure nostalgia. I had rose-colored glasses. I don't normally get this, like, pumped and pissed in a review, but fuck me if this song doesn't bring something out of me. What's especially annoying is that sat on the same 2-song release is Eleanor Rigby, which, either by sheer luck or the beauty of the band's experimentation towards the end of the 60s, stands as one of their best songs ever made under the Beatles' name. I know very little of classical or string-based musicianship, but looking into the composition, this clearly had an insane amount of production and thought put into it, and I'm glad to see a song pre-Hey Jude feature such a wide array of sounds. Getting into music at the turn of the decade and beyond, this is where the Beatles stops being a divisive band to me and one that actually has legitimate claim to being proper, all-time rock great. The addition of Billy Preston also makes for an element much needed to bring further solidity to the track, and as with Eleanor Rigby some years later. It shows off this sudden and worthwhile experimentation of evolution of the band's sound, now with this extra person in the studio. Overall, in terms of each member and their instrumental contribution, nothing has really stood out for either good or bad reasons, getting into this next section of songs here, with one song that stands as a perfect representation of late 60s simplicity. It's about the only song that's really noteworthy here, Something. The final 2 songs on this album, Let It Be and The Long Winding Road, are wonderful examples, however, of how to cap off a career in terms of thematic lyrics and undeniable vibes and emotion. Oddly enough, the contributions from Phil Spector that specifically upset the inherent lead of the band, Paul McCartney, made for better versions of said songs, if you ask me. Specifically, The Long and Winding Road feels like a proper culmination of the band's career, while now, of course, not being known as the final piece of Beatles music thanks to the recently released Now and Then that came out, I believe, a couple months ago, at the start of the year. Regardless, it's a good way to cap off the compilation with the several different pieces intended coming together for a complete package. The simplistic inflection of the band's earliest work coming to light in the song structure, the minimal yet easy to notice changes made via the guest, it stands as just pretty good. This is pretty good. As noted in the beginning of this review, this is a compilation album above all else. I did have critical opinions on some of the songs, and some very personal ones, but for the most part, this is a album that many people, including myself, can critically praise as enjoyable and structurally sound, therefore leading to an inherent positive scoring. Again, this is a greatest hits compilation. This isn't, for the most part, like a typical album where you're gonna have some stinkers or some songs that are either dark horses or dog shit. If you take the score of this review and put it up against normal albums, it may seem high or even low, but this is taking into account any and all factors noted here. So with that said, the one compilation from the Beatles gets an 8.2 out of 10. And that's a review. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. We'll also get a conversation going about the Beatles. Can I just say, fuck Yellow Submarine one more time? Thanks for the commission suggestion, Nate. Have a good day. Stay hydrated. I'll see you next time.